The dam had been young once. When people first poured concrete into the narrow cut of the valley, the rock walls still smelled of fresh dust. Trucks crawled up and down the temporary roads. Men in hard hats shouted to one another over the grind of engines. The river, forced into pipes and side channels, frothed and complained, but could not do much more. Bit by bit, the wall rose. It climbed from the bed of the river up toward the sky, gray and smooth on the side that faced the water, step-shaped and practical on the side that faced the slope. When it was finished, the valley behind it began to fill. Water climbed the sides of the hills that had once been dry. Trees drowned slowly, their crowns becoming small islands and then black skeletons that finally vanished. Below the dam, a village waited. It had been there long before the first surveyors came with their maps and sticks. Wooden houses stood along the banks, leaning over gardens and narrow paths. A small church tower held a bell that had rung for births, weddings, and funerals. Children had played in the shallows in summer, and in winter the villagers had cut holes in the ice to fish. They knew that the river could flood. Old people remembered high water marks on the walls. Stories were told of years when rafts had floated in the streets. When officials arrived with papers and plans, they talked of safety and electricity and a bright future. They promised new houses on higher ground. In the end, the village did not move. It sank. The new houses were built on the hillside, above the level that the engineers said the water would reach. People carried furniture and pots and framed photographs up the road. The bell was taken down from the tower and brought to the new church. The old roofs remained behind, waiting. One by one, the last residents left. They walked away along the muddy track, each with a bundle or a suitcase, each turning back at least once to look. For a while, the old village still stood. Chickens scratched in abandoned yards. Curtains moved in broken windows. Then the dam gates closed a little more, and the water rose further. In the end, only the tops of a few chimneys remained above the new surface, like teeth in the mouth of a sleeping animal. Later, even those were gone. The bear had known the village in its last years. He had been a younger animal then, heavy and strong, his coat thick and smooth, his shoulders broad. He lived mostly in the forest on the hills that press close to the river. Still, the smell of people and food had drawn him now and then toward the edge of their world. At first, he had come only at night. He had followed the scent of fish and chicken bones to the dumping place behind the last house. There, he had found piles of peelings, stale bread, and sometimes the rich remains of festival meals. He had learned the sound of lids on metal cans, the rhythm of dogs barking at nothing, the exact hour when lights went out in most windows. In late autumn, when berries were gone and nuts were hidden too deeply, he had crept closer. Once he had stood at the edge of a garden and watched a woman hang sheets on a line, their white cloth snapping softly in the wind. Another time, he had seen two children playing with a red ball in the dust near the river, their voices bright in the twilight. He had never walked between the houses while people were awake. He had waited for the deep, even silence that came after the last lamp had gone dark. Then he had moved through the village like a thick shadow, leaving damp paw prints on the hard ground. He had smelled soap, smoke, and cooked meat. All of that changed when the dam began to close. At first, the bear had only noticed that the river ran differently. Its voice changed. Its surface grew slow and wide. Fish moved in new patterns. Pools appeared behind the bends where none had been before. Then the people came more often. They arrived with machines and bright vests, putting marks on trees and building small temporary bridges. They did not stay at night, but their smell rubbed off on many things. The bear watched from the trees, his breath slow, his nose full of new information. Later, after many visits and much planning, the trucks came for the villagers. He saw people carry their lives uphill. He heard the shouts, the arguments, the tired silences. One evening, when he crept down to the old dumping place, he found it smaller. There was less food. On the next night, there was almost none. The bear went away for a while. He walked higher into the hills, following late berries and the last of the autumn fruit. He dug in rotten logs for grubs. He ignored the beating of hammers and the distant rumble of concrete mixers. When he came back in spring, the world had changed. The village had gone under a calm, cold sheet of water. Where there had once been roofs and paths, there was now a wide, green surface that looked like glass when the wind did not move it. The dam stood like a wall at the throat of the valley, holding the new lake in its hand. The bear did not understand plans or blueprints, but he understood absence. He walked along the new shore and sniffed. He could still smell the old village under the water. There was the faint, sour trace of soaked wood, the powdery hint of plaster, the dark, deep scent of drowned earth. It came up in soft breaths through the clear surface, especially on warm days. He climbed down toward the dam. The structure was tall and severe, its downstream face an orderly slope of steps and ledges. Water spilled through a controlled opening in the middle, falling in a bright white curtain into the plunge pool below. The bear felt the vibration of its weight through his paws and into his bones. He did not come too close at first. The smoothness of the stone confused him. There was nowhere to dig his claws. The constant roar of the falling water filled his ears. He stood in the shelter of the rocks beside the wall and watched the river below the dam stumble away, thinner and more tired than he remembered. After that, he returned many times. Season after season, year after year, he made the old dam part of his path. He learned the safe ways down to the base, where the river left the concrete and began to behave like itself again. He found narrow shelves where fish rested, stunned by the fall. He discovered that bushes near the spray grew thick and full, offering berries and shelter. The bear became a sort of guard, though no one had asked him to do it. No other animal his size lived so close to the wall. Deer came to drink below it, but did not linger. Wolves and foxes passed through quickly. Birds rested on the ledges higher up, then went on their way. Only the bear remained, season after season, watching. He saw the lake rise and fall. In spring, when snow melted in the far mountains, the water behind the dam swelled. Engineers opened and closed gates according to rules written in their buildings in the town. The bear did not see them, but he felt their decisions in the changing height of the white curtain. Sometimes, the water almost reached the top of the wall. The lake spread inland, licking at higher strips of ground, swallowing bushes that had grown comfortable on its last remembered shore. When that happened, the bear smelled the drowned village more strongly. The new water reached another piece of old wood, another empty room. In late summer and autumn, the water fell again. A pale ring on the rocks along the shore showed where it had been. Muddy terraces and belts of drying weed appeared. The drowned village sank a little deeper into silence, until next time. The river below never forgot. Even when the flow was reduced to a tame band that slipped quietly around the stones, it kept its old impulse. It wanted to go where it had always gone. It wanted the channel it had carved over long green years, past the houses, between the willow roots, under the leaning footbridge. Now, when it looked up, it saw steps and concrete instead of its old path. Water does not think in words, but it solves problems. When the dam stood in its way, the river tried everything that soft, patient force can try. In spring floods, when meltwater filled the lake, the river pressed against every joint in the wall. It threw branches and logs and whole trees at the gates, testing their strength. It rolled stones along the bed, grinding them against the base. On winter nights, when ice formed, the river crept into tiny cracks and froze there, expanding with slow, silent pressure. When it thawed, it left those cracks a little wider. The engineers expected all this. They had designed the structure with such pressures in mind. They inspected it, measured it, and patched small weaknesses. They thought in decades and regulations. The river thought in centuries and valleys. The bear watched both. He saw the white scars where repair crews had poured fresh concrete. He saw fine lines appear on older surfaces, like wrinkles on a face that had once been smooth. He felt the slight change in the vibration under his paws when the lake pressed harder against the wall. Once, in early spring, the river came very close to winning. There had been heavy snow in the mountains and a sudden, warm spell. Water rushed into the lake faster than the gates could release it. The surface rose almost to the limit marks. The spillway roared like a beast. The bear stood on a high ledge near the dam and felt every part of the wall tremble. The river below swelled as it had in the days before the dam, filling the old channel to the brim. It rushed over the stones, along the bends where the village had once stood. If there had still been houses and gardens there, they would have been swallowed. Instead, the water spread over a wide, empty space, where only the tops of submerged roofs remembered the weight of rain. The bear saw none of that. He saw only the change in color and height. Still, something in him understood that this was more than usual. He did not leave his ledge. He stayed there through the day and into the night, watching the white tongue of the spillway, listening to the deep voice of the water. Once, in the blue hour after sunset, he felt a sudden new shudder and heard a low crack, almost too deep for his ears. For a moment, the water at the base of the dam frothed differently. A darker line appeared near one corner, where a piece of the wall had given way slightly. Muddy water gushed through, carrying with it small stones and chips of concrete. The river seized on this opening with wild joy. It took the bear a few heartbeats to grasp what he was seeing. He watched as the new stream chewed at its edges, widening them grain by grain. The old impulse to break through and run along the drowned village pulled at the river like a hook. Then the humans arrived. Warning lights on the small control building flashed. Sirens sounded faintly from somewhere down the road. Trucks crawled along the access track on the upper side. On the lower side, floodlights snapped on and brightened the foam. The bear, startled by the sudden glare, retreated into shadow. He watched as small figures in helmets and harnesses moved along the steps. They carried tools, hoses, and heavy sacks. Some climbed down to the new opening and forced material into it. Others adjusted controls in the building, changing the pull of the main gates. Slowly, reluctantly, the river let itself be guided back into the official paths. The extra flow through the crack weakened. The muddy line cleared. New concrete hid the wound. By dawn, the wall looked almost untouched except for a slightly different shade of gray. The people left. The engines faded. The warning lights stopped. The bear moved forward again. He stepped onto the ledge where he had been and looked down at the place where the water had tried to escape. The new patch shone pale in the early light. He sniffed the air. The smell of wet cement was strong. Under it, darker and deeper, lay the old scent of the drowned village. The river had reached out with one more hand and been pushed back, but in touching the old stone, it had stirred its memory again. Time passed. The bear aged. His fur lost some of its shine. Scars marked his muzzle and shoulders from old fights and careless moments. His movements grew slower. In spring, he woke more stiffly from his winter dens. In autumn, he tired more quickly as he gathered food. He stayed near the dam. There was enough to eat along its edges. Berries grew in the moist soil below the spray. Fish collected in eddies under the fall. Insects and small animals thrived in the mixed zone where concrete met rock and forest. He came to know the moods of the river well. He could tell by the tone of its voice whether it was full or thin. He knew how its color changed with each season, how clear snowmelt differed from the brown flood that came after storms. He learned which little side channels filled first when the lake was high and which dried last when it was low. Above all, he felt, without words, that the water never stopped looking for its old way. Even on calm days, when the spillway shrank to a gentle sheet and the lake lay flat and bright behind the wall, he could sense a restlessness in the liquid weight pressing against the concrete. The drowned village called to it, in silence. Sometimes, in late summer, when the lake stood low enough, broken shapes rose close to the surface. The tops of the oldest trees appeared, their trunks dark and slippery. A corner of a stone foundation showed on a shallow slope. The bear, swimming along the shore or wading at the edge, brushed against the outlines of what had once been walls. He did not know they were houses. He only knew that the floor of the lake was not even, that it held secret structures. On still evenings, he sometimes heard sounds that were not there. Wind slipped over the dam and into the valley below. The river carried faint echoes. On those nights, the bear would sit on a flat rock and listen. To a human ear, the noise would have been only the usual mix of flowing water, moving air, and the small creaks of cooling stone. To the bear, whose hearing was keen and whose mind carried old smells, it felt as though voices floated just under the surface of the sound. He could not understand them. Yet he stayed, as if some part of him knew that he was the only creature now who saw the wall and the water and the memory beneath both, all at once. Years turned. The new village on the hillside grew more solid. Trees planted along its streets took root and climbed. Children who had been carried there in their parents' arms grew up knowing only this place as home. To them, the drowned houses were stories, not memories. The dam was a feature on the horizon, a gray stripe beyond the fields. They heard about floods in lessons at school. They saw pictures of the old village in black and white on classroom walls. They did not smell the soaked timber or hear the old bell under the water. The bear did. He did not know dates or names, but he knew that there had been a time before the wall and a time after. He lived in the line between. Each spring, the river tested the dam again. It came with weight and speed, pushing branches against the gates, churning at the base, sending pressure into every tiny weakness. Each time, human maintenance held. Fresh patches, strong anchors, and careful control kept the structure standing. Each time, the bear watched. Sometimes he stood on his hind legs for a better view, his dark shape briefly matching the height of the lower steps. Sometimes he lay on his belly with his chin on his paws, eyes half closed, listening to the deep rumble. He became, without knowing it, the one constant witness. Workers changed, engineers retired, villagers aged and died. New people moved into the houses on the hill, their faces unknown to those who had first signed the dam plans. Only the bear remained, year after year, tracking the struggle between wall and water. On an autumn evening, when the air smelled of cold rain and leaf mold, the river tried another way. The lake was not especially high. The spillway sang at a normal level. Yet below the dam, the water found a soft place. For many seasons, it had been seeping through gravel near an old service tunnel. Little by little, it had stolen grains of sand and pieces of stone. No engineer had noticed. The bear had noticed only that one small patch of bank was always damp. That evening, he saw the damp patch fail. It happened quietly, without the drama of the earlier crack in the wall. The soil there slumped, then sank. A small whirlpool formed in the shallow water nearby. Muddy liquid poured down into the new hole, hollowing it further. The bear stood up, ears forward. He watched as the river below the dam reached back toward its old bed, not by climbing the wall, but by slipping under the edge of the built structure. The new channel it was digging was tiny, no wider than his paw, then no wider than his head. Even so, the direction was clear. Once again, humans came. Warning systems had been improved since the last scare. Sensors in the ground felt the change in pressure. A low alarm sounded in the control building. Lights flashed on the road. Trucks arrived with rock and special fabric. Workers in boots and reflective vests moved quickly along the bank, filling the hole, blocking the new path. Machines pressed the material down. The river, pulled by gravity and habit, pushed against it. For a while, the outcome was uncertain. The bear, standing in the shadow of the wall, could feel the pull and counterpull in the ground beneath him. It seemed to vibrate between two desires, one to hold, one to let go. In the end, the dam won again. The patched bank hardened. The whirlpool shrank and disappeared. The river, forced to give up this attempt, slid back into the official channel, where it turned under the watchful eye of the control building and ran on toward distant fields and towns it had never seen before the concrete was poured. The men wiped sweat from their faces, even in the cool air. They checked their instruments, spoke into radios, and drove away. The warning lights stopped flashing. The bear stayed. He walked down to the repaired spot and sniffed carefully. The smell of river mud there was very strong. Under it, he could still pick out the faint, stubborn scent of the old village, the one that had given him food long ago. The river had tried to go home again. It had failed again. Yet each attempt left a mark, a new weakness, a new scar. The bear felt tired. He was not as fast or as strong as he had been in the years when he first watched trucks cross the valley. His joints ached when he climbed the steeper paths. His fur grew thin in some places. Winter crawled deeper into his bones, yet he still made his way to the dam. He climbed to his usual ledges and lay there, watching the white curtain of the spillway, listening to the deep voice of the lake pressing against the wall. He did not know how many more springs he would see. He did not know whether the dam would last as long as his life, or longer. He did not know whether the river would ever truly find its way back to the exact channels between the old houses, or whether the drowned village would remain a memory held only in the faint smells rising from the water. He knew only this: the river did not forget. Season after season, year after year, it pressed, seeped, searched, and tried. The dam held, cracked, was patched, and held again. The village above moved on. The village below slept. Between all of them, on a rock that overlooked the constant struggle, an aging bear watched. The one creature who had eaten scraps in the old streets, fished in the new pool below the wall, and seen the water rise and fall over the silent roofs. If someone had stood beside him on one of those evenings, that person might have felt that the river was not simply a line of moving water, but a memory with weight and direction. The bear did not think such thoughts. He only watched. He saw when snowmelt turned the spillway into a roaring sheet. He saw when summer heat shrank it to a thin veil. He saw the pale rings on the rocks that marked where the lake had stood in different years, like the growth lines in a tree. He listened when, in certain winds, faint echoes seemed to rise from the drowned village. Sometimes, when the water level and the air were just right, and the dusk had settled softly, it sounded almost like distant footsteps on wooden floors or the hush of voices in small rooms. The bear's ears twitched. He lifted his head and stared at the wall and the water, as if looking for someone he had once seen in the glow of a kitchen window. No one came. The only homecoming the river could manage now was to brush against old stones under the lake, to send its taste gently into the cracks, to carry grains of brick and plaster slowly downstream. The bear remained the only witness. He guarded nothing in a human sense. He did not protect the dam from damage or the village from flood. He did not report problems or sign papers. Yet, his steady presence on the rocks and ledges turned him into something like a living marker. As long as he stood there, the story of wall, water, and village had at least one pair of eyes that had seen its beginning and watched its long middle. One day, when the bear was gone, the river would still press, and the dam would still hold or fail. People would still move in and out of the houses on the hill. Children would still learn that there had once been another village below. They might walk to the edge of the lake and throw stones, laughing, watching the rings spread. They might listen for echoes and hear only their own voices. They might see the wall and think only of electricity and work. They would not know that for many seasons a single animal had watched the effort of the river to find its old road, and that in his simple, patient body the valley's long memory had been held as clearly as in any book or plan. The river would go on trying. The dam would go on resisting. The drowned village would go on sleeping. And somewhere between them all, in the quiet geometry of water and stone, the path home would remain, even if it took many more years for the river to fully remember the way.